I was driving home one night after a long shift, the roads mostly empty except for the occasional flicker of headlights in the distance. My mind was already drifting to bed, the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that makes your hands stiff on the wheel and your eyes fight to stay open. When a rideshare request popped up, I almost ignored it, but the pickup location was on my way, a dead-end road that branched off from the main highway. It was late, past 2 a.m., and normally I would have avoided it, but I needed the extra fare. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against the windows and makes your own breathing sound loud inside the car. The road was narrow and lined with thick trees on both sides. Shadows pooled in every curve, and the streetlights were few and far between, barely touching the asphalt. I followed the GPS pin to the end, slowing as I reached the dead end. There was nothing there. No porch light, no movement, no one standing on the side of the road. I checked the app again. The pin hadn't moved. I waited a minute, the engine humming softly, my eyes scanning the dark. A faint breeze stirred the leaves, and I felt that creeping kind of awareness that comes when something seems off but you can't put a finger on it. I tapped the gas, ready to back up and leave, thinking maybe it was a misrouted request. The car didn't respond. I pressed harder. Nothing. At first, I thought the transmission had failed. The engine was running, the lights on, but the car didn't move an inch forward. My heart started to pick up, and I quickly shifted into neutral, then drive again. Still nothing. I stepped on the brake and checked behind me. The road was empty, just darkness and the faint shimmer of distant lights on the highway beyond the trees. That's when I noticed it. A dark line stretching from my rear axle into the shadows between the trees. A chain, hooked to my car, taut and metallic, disappearing into the darkness. I froze, my hands gripping the wheel tightly. I slammed the horn, short, sharp blasts at first, then long, continuous honks. The sound felt unreal in the quiet. The echo bounced back off the trees and the low hills, and for a few seconds, nothing happened. The chain remained tight, heavy, an impossible weight that shouldn't have been there. I tried shifting again, rocking the car, my mind racing through everything mechanical I knew. Nothing worked. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, the chain went slack. It gave way in a shudder that rattled the car, falling back into the dark without a sound. I could see nothing in the trees, nothing moving, but the sense of weight that had held me frozen just moments ago was gone. My hands were shaking, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it would burst through my chest. I tapped the gas lightly. The car moved forward without resistance. I pulled onto the main road immediately, checking my rearview mirror a dozen times before I even considered slowing down. Every instinct told me to stop, to pull over, but the highway was empty. No lights behind me, no movement, just the endless dark stretching ahead. I drove for 30 minutes, keeping the car in the center of the lane, scanning the treeline as I went, watching for anything that might appear in the shadows. I didn't take my eyes off the road, my brain refusing to process anything beyond the edges of the asphalt and the reflection of my own headlights. By the time I reached a gas station, I was shaking so badly I could barely hold the wheel. I parked under the bright fluorescent lights, the car idling, and just sat there. I couldn't explain what had happened, not logically, not realistically. There was no mechanical reason the chain could have been there. I examined the car, walking around it under the harsh lights. Nothing. No dents, no scratches, no sign that anything had been hooked to it. The metal under the axle was clean, the rear wheels unscathed. Everything was normal. Yet I knew what I had seen, and I knew what had held the car immobile. I shut the engine off and sat in the driver's seat for another 15 minutes, just breathing, trying to convince myself it had been a trick of the shadows, the exhaustion playing games with my eyes. But I couldn't shake the memory of the weight of the chain, the sound of the metal pulling taut, the impossibility of it just being gone seconds later. My mind ran through every story I'd ever heard about people disappearing late at night, about ambushes on isolated roads. I realized how close I had come to being trapped, powerless in the middle of nowhere, alone. Eventually, I started the car again and drove the remaining miles home without stopping, my eyes wide, my hands never leaving the wheel. I didn't check the rideshare app again. I didn't accept another request. I parked the car in my driveway and sat there, engine off, staring at the darkness beyond the porch light. Sleep didn't come easy that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the chain, the trees, the way the darkness had reached out and held me in place. I never reopened the app. I quit driving that night. I couldn't explain it, couldn't rationalize it, and I didn't want to risk it happening again. The dead-end road, the empty shadows, and the chain that shouldn't have existed stayed with me. A reminder of how suddenly a normal night could turn into something I wasn't ready to face. I eventually told myself it had been a fluke, a moment of exhaustion and imagination, but deep down I knew better. Some things, no matter how real or impossible, stay with you, and some nights are better left untraveled. The next day, I inspected my car again, all over, and everything was fine. No scratches, no damage, nothing to suggest any force had been applied to it. Mechanically, it was perfect. The experience made me cautious, hyper-aware of every rideshare request, every late-night detour, and I never put myself in a position to wonder what might be waiting in the shadows. It was a single night, one short ride that should have been ordinary, and yet it changed the way I looked at the roads, at darkness, and at the quiet spaces where help is nowhere to be found. I never went back. I was driving late one night on a stretch of highway I thought I knew well, the kind of road that runs straight for miles, lined with dark forests and occasional signs warning of deer crossings. I had taken this route countless times after late shifts, when the roads were empty and the headlights ahead seemed like solitary stars in the dark. That night, I was tired, my body stiff from sitting at a desk all day, but I needed to get home. The sky was clear, the air cold and still, and the only sound was the soft hum of tires on asphalt and the occasional whisper of wind brushing the trees. Traffic was light, just a few trucks in the distance, and I found some comfort in that solitude. I kept my speed steady, not too fast, aware of the curves and dips in the road. The headlights on my dashboard reflected off the windshield in faint streaks as I passed under the occasional street lamp, each one giving a momentary glimpse of the roadside trees, tall and silent. Somewhere in the distance, a lone owl hooted, and I realized how quiet it was, how the usual background noise of the world was gone. About 30 minutes into the drive, I noticed something strange. Up ahead, a car had pulled to the side, lights on, doors open. I slowed, thinking maybe someone had broken down. The closer I got, the more I realized there was no one there. The driver's seat was empty, the passenger side the same, and the car seemed abandoned mid-motion, as if someone had just vanished. I felt a shiver go down my spine, but I chalked it up to fatigue. People leave their cars sometimes. Maybe they were just checking something or on the phone. I passed carefully, giving it a wide berth, and continued down the road. Then I noticed another one. Another vehicle, parked diagonally across the lane, doors open, engine still running, but empty. I gripped the wheel tighter, my knuckles whitening. Something wasn't right. My mind ran through every rational explanation. Maybe they were responding to a call, a small traffic jam ahead, but as I scanned the road, the eerie pattern became obvious. There were more cars, scattered along the shoulder, all with engines running, all empty. I slowed even further, eyes flicking to the mirrors and the edges of the forest. The rain had started lightly, misting over the windshield, making the reflections of the headlights from the empty cars shimmer in strange ways. The sound of water hitting the roof and hood felt louder somehow, amplified by the tension building in my chest. I realized I was alone among dozens of vehicles that seemed to exist only as hollow shells, waiting in silence. The thought of continuing forward made my stomach tighten. I hesitated, my mind searching for the safest course. Reversing felt dangerous too, but I couldn't ignore the instinct telling me that whatever had drawn all those drivers out of their cars was not something I wanted to encounter. Carefully, I shifted into reverse, inching backward along the shoulder. Gravel crunched under the tires, and the headlights caught glimpses of wet leaves and slick tree trunks. I checked my mirrors constantly, making sure no one was approaching. No one had noticed me moving against the flow. Eventually, I found an opening, an exit ramp that curved away from the main road. I turned onto it slowly, keeping the wheels steady despite the slick pavement, and felt a slight sense of relief as I descended onto the surface streets. The trees were still dark and looming, but the cars were fewer now, the abnormality of the highway behind me. I kept my speed low, cautious of puddles and the occasional patch of wet leaves that could send the tires sliding. The city lights in the distance felt like a promise of safety, a return to familiarity and the mundane routines of daily life. By the time I reached a well-lit gas station, I was shaking slightly. My hands were damp from the cold, my face pale, and my heart still raced despite the calm surroundings. I parked under the harsh fluorescent lights and just sat there, taking slow breaths, trying to process what I had just experienced. The world outside seemed normal again, the rain lighter, the occasional car passing by. Yet in my mind, the image of all those empty cars, engines running and doors open, stayed vivid, like a warning that the ordinary could become threatening in an instant. The next morning, I read the news. Authorities reported that a group had used a fake emergency broadcast to manipulate drivers on that exact stretch of highway. The alert had instructed people to pull over immediately for a fabricated hazard, and when they left their cars, the group had taken advantage of the situation. Several people had been robbed, and 3 were hospitalized after resisting or slipping in the rain while fleeing. Reading the article, I realized the weight of what had happened. My decision to stay in the car, tired and stubborn as I was, had probably saved my life. I replayed every moment in my head. The first abandoned vehicle, the second, the growing pattern that had made my skin crawl. The sound of rain on the roof, the empty engines humming, the wind pushing through open doors. It all came back in stark detail. I understood then how quickly ordinary life could turn into something dangerous and unpredictable, and how small, deliberate choices could mean the difference between harm and safety. After that night, I avoided that highway when driving late, especially during storms or at times when visibility was low. I became more alert to the ways information could be manipulated, to the trust one placed in signals and signs. The experience stayed with me not as a nightmare, but as a clear lesson about vigilance and restraint. The empty cars and running engines were burned into my memory, a reminder that sometimes the safest action is to do nothing at all, to sit tight and wait until clarity returns. Weeks later, I could still feel the tension from that drive, the strange, hollow stillness of the highway. Every time I drove alone at night, my awareness was sharper, my eyes scanning the edges of the road, the shoulders, the forest line. I didn't panic, but I never forgot that night. I had encountered a situation that seemed ordinary at first, a minor inconvenience, and it had revealed a fragility in the world I took for granted. Staying inside, refusing to leave, and following my instincts had kept me alive. That knowledge stayed with me, quiet and unshakable, a lesson learned without consequence for me, but with a heavy cost for others who hadn't made the same choice. I was driving home during a storm that had been building since late evening. The rain fell in thick sheets, hammering the windshield with a relentless rhythm that made everything outside look like a gray, shifting blur. The wipers barely kept up, leaving streaks and gaps that made the highway almost impossible to see clearly. The sky was a constant black slate, broken only by the occasional flash of lightning that illuminated the slick asphalt for a brief, blinding instant. I had left work late, exhausted, my eyes heavy, but the thought of a warm bed and dry sheets kept me moving. I was somewhere just past the halfway point on the interstate, past familiar exits but still far enough from home that I couldn't relax, when I noticed the brake lights ahead stretching across the lanes like a wall of red lanterns. First, I thought it was a crash. The highway is narrow in this area, 3 lanes each way, but during storms, accidents aren't unusual. I slowed immediately, pressing lightly on the brakes, my eyes scanning for any sign of impact. Nothing. No twisted metal, no smoke, no emergency lights cutting through the downpour. Just a long line of stopped cars, their engines running, wipers swinging uselessly. I eased closer, my hands tight on the wheel, trying to see if there was a turnoff or something ahead that could explain it. The rain blurred everything, but still, there was nothing. I stopped behind a dark SUV, leaving a good distance, my heart already picking up speed. 10 minutes passed. 10 minutes of rain, the sound of water bouncing off my hood, and the red glow of brake lights stretching into the darkness. And then I realized something that made my stomach drop. None of the drivers were inside their cars. Doors were open, swinging slightly with the wind. Seats were empty. Engines idled, tires spinning silently on wet asphalt. But the cars were abandoned. I blinked, thinking maybe I was misreading it, but the more I looked, the more obvious it became. Every vehicle ahead, every lane for as far as I could see, was empty. The wind whipped rain through open doors, turning the interiors of vehicles into small, chaotic waterfalls. The smell of wet upholstery mixed with the metallic tang of asphalt and gasoline. I shifted in my seat, feeling suddenly vulnerable, trapped among 100 silent, empty vehicles. My instincts screamed at me to get out, to move, to turn around, but every option seemed dangerous. The storm made visibility nearly zero. The shoulder was slick with water. I thought about staying put, letting it pass, but the eerie stillness made my skin crawl. Slowly, carefully, I shifted into reverse. The tires hissed against the wet asphalt, and I kept the brake pressed lightly, inching backward, my eyes darting between mirrors. The cars behind me were also empty, like a corridor of abandoned metal. No one shouted, no one moved, just the storm and the relentless rhythm of rain. The SUV behind me was a phantom, its engine still running, wipers still swinging, but no one inside. I eased back far enough to reach the shoulder, my tires crunching through gravel as I turned toward the next exit. Every second of that drive along the shoulder was tense. Water sprayed from my wheels, rain lashed across the windshield, and the storm seemed louder here, sharper somehow. My hands were wet from gripping the steering wheel, slick with condensation, and my heart refused to slow. I kept the car on the far edge of the pavement, careful not to lose control. The exit ramp curved steeply, lined by trees that flung water in sheets, branches slick and dark, and I felt the strange, hollow emptiness of the highway fading behind me. I pulled onto the surface streets, where the storm had turned the road into a blur of reflections from streetlights and puddles. There were a few scattered vehicles, drivers moving carefully, no one in a hurry. I kept my speed low, eyes scanning every side street and parking lot, wary of anything that seemed off. By the time I reached the safety of a well-lit gas station, I was shaking from adrenaline, my heart still hammering against my ribs. I parked under the harsh glow of fluorescent lights, engine off, just sitting there, staring at the rain. My mind kept returning to the highway, the abandoned cars, and the knowledge that I had been surrounded by empty vehicles with engines running, 100 people just gone. The next morning, I read the news, bleary-eyed and still unsettled. A group had broadcast a fake emergency alert over the highway's signage and digital radio channels. Drivers were instructed to pull over immediately for a supposed chemical spill. When people left their vehicles, the group had moved in, taking what they wanted. 3 people were hospitalized, shaken, and physically harmed. I didn't read the details beyond that, my stomach still turning. I realized, with a clarity that made my throat dry, that staying in the car had probably saved my life. My tired, stubborn refusal to leave the vehicle, my choice to sit tight and wait it out, had kept me out of reach of the robbers. I thought back to the storm, the heavy rain that obscured my vision and muffled the world. If it had been a clear night, I might have driven straight past the exit, followed the signs blindly, and ended up trapped with the others. The chaos of the storm, the isolation of being alone, had given me a focus I would have lacked in ordinary conditions. I kept replaying the moments on the highway, the red glow of brake lights, the open doors, the silence of so many abandoned drivers. Every time I did, I felt the weight of how close I had come to disaster. After that night, I didn't take the highway late at night again unless absolutely necessary. I avoided the roads that had digital signage and radio warnings. I thought about it often, especially when driving alone, and I understood something about survival in that kind of situation. It isn't about skill or speed or luck. Sometimes it's about paying attention, being patient, and resisting the instinct to act without thinking. Sitting there in the car, tired and stubborn, had been the only thing that made sense, and it had been the only thing that kept me alive. Weeks later, the memory still lingered, the storm in my mind as vivid as it had been on the asphalt. I could feel the wet steering wheel under my fingers, hear the constant patter of rain, see the red glow stretching into the darkness. I told myself that night had been a rare fluke, a convergence of circumstances most people would never see. But I also knew that ordinary decisions, small acts of restraint, can make all the difference between life and something far worse. I had driven through a storm, faced a highway full of empty cars, and come out unscathed because I had done nothing at all. And that understanding stayed with me, quiet but unshakable, a reminder of how close I had come to the edge and how one simple choice had saved me. I was driving home late one night after a long day at work. The sky was clear but heavy with darkness, and the highway was almost empty. Streetlights flickered in the distance, casting pale circles on the wet asphalt, and the occasional passing truck reflected off the lines like moving mirrors. I had taken this route countless times, a straight stretch of road through low hills and dense woods, but something about that night felt heavier. My eyes were tired, my hands stiff from gripping the wheel, and I could feel the fatigue settling in behind my ribs. I kept telling myself to stay alert, to keep my mind on the road, but the hum of the tires and the quiet of the night made it hard to focus. About 30 minutes into the drive, I noticed a faint movement at the edge of my vision. A figure, maybe, or the shadow of a sign swaying in the wind. I slowed slightly, trying to get a better look, and then saw it again. Something was off. I realized that all the roadside areas where people normally parked, the small gravel turnouts, the rest areas that dotted the highway, were empty. That in itself wasn't unusual at that hour, but the emptiness felt deliberate, almost too complete. No other cars were stopped, no signs of life in the sparse homes that lined the outskirts. I pressed on, trying to shake the feeling. The road curved slightly, the headlights cutting a narrow path through the darkness, illuminating the trees in sharp, shifting patterns. I passed under a tall overpass, the concrete wet and glistening, and for a moment the world felt claustrophobic. The trees pressed close on either side, and the faint sound of wind through their branches made a low, constant rustle that felt louder than it should. My pulse quickened. I had been on this road dozens of times at night, but for the first time it didn't feel familiar. Every shadow seemed sharper, every movement in the trees suspicious. A few miles ahead, I saw a cluster of cars stopped in the lanes. Brake lights glowed red through the darkness, scattered like distant, unmoving stars. I slowed, expecting the usual, a crash, a traffic jam, something ordinary. But as I drew closer, the oddness became clear. The cars were all idling, doors open, seats empty. Engines ran, lights blinked, wipers swung uselessly back and forth, and still there was no one inside. My stomach dropped. I scanned each vehicle as I passed, heart racing. The rain, which had started lightly, turned into a thin mist, blurring the lines and reflecting the red of the brake lights. I could see through the windows, and every car was the same, abandoned, ordinary, and terrifyingly still. I slowed to a crawl. My mind ran through every possible explanation. Maybe people had been directed out of their vehicles by some emergency. Maybe they were checking the trees for fallen branches or responding to an alert on their phones. None of it made sense. The scene felt wrong in ways I couldn't put into words. The engines were running, but no one was there to hear them. The doors were open, letting wind and rain rush in, yet the interior of each car looked untouched. My pulse was loud in my ears. I made the decision to reverse slowly. The shoulder was narrow, gravel and mud giving way under the tires, but it was the only way to get clear. I kept my foot lightly on the brake, inching backward, careful not to startle anyone or anything behind me. Each car I passed remained still, indifferent, and the further I backed up, the more I became aware of the isolation. The highway stretched in both directions, a corridor of empty vehicles, engines humming softly in the foggy night. The mist of rain blurred them further, making the scene feel like a photograph of a moment frozen in time. Eventually, I found a small exit, a curve that led away from the highway and into surface streets. I took it slowly, tires crunching over wet gravel, headlights swinging through shadows that seemed to press close. The trees gave way gradually, and the darkness thinned, replaced by streetlights and the occasional passing car. My heart began to slow, though I remained tense, scanning the edges of the road, expecting some sign of movement that never came. I reached a gas station and parked under the harsh fluorescent lights, engine off, sitting in the car for several minutes. My hands were still shaking, gripping the wheel, and my mind replayed the images over and over. Engines running, doors open, empty vehicles stretching into the night. I thought about what could have caused it, what reason would make dozens of people abandon their cars mid-drive. The night and the silence had turned something ordinary into something threatening without any warning. The next morning, I read the news. Authorities reported that a group had used a false emergency alert on the highway's digital signs and radio channels to trick drivers into stopping. People had abandoned their cars, and the group had taken advantage of the situation to commit theft and assault. Several people were hospitalized. Reading the article, I felt the weight of what I had narrowly avoided. My decision to stay in the car, to resist instinctively leaving, had likely saved me from the same fate. The storm, the darkness, the fatigue, all of it had combined in a way that forced me to rely solely on caution and restraint. I kept replaying the moments over and over. The first abandoned car, the second, the long line of engines running like mechanical ghosts in the night. The feeling of being surrounded, alone but safe in a moving vehicle, was vivid and unmistakable. The ordinary had become threatening in an instant, and the only thing that had protected me was patience, awareness, and the stubborn decision to remain seated in my own car. Weeks later, I still thought about that drive. I found myself avoiding late-night trips on that stretch of highway, alert for patterns, for anomalies in the behavior of other drivers, for anything that might hint at danger. I understood something fundamental, that safety often depends on small, deliberate choices, on resisting instinctual impulses when the situation is unclear. Staying in the car, despite the tension and the unease, had been the only rational response, and it had kept me alive. That night had left a mark on me, not a physical one, but a mental imprint. Every time I drove alone at night, I remained alert, scanning the edges of the road, the shoulders, the shadows where other drivers might be or where something could go wrong. The memory of those empty cars, engines running, doors open, stayed with me as a reminder of how quickly the ordinary could turn dangerous, and how one careful, deliberate decision can mean the difference between survival and disaster. I was driving a long stretch of farmland highway just after 2 in the morning, the kind of road that feels endless and exposed once the rest of the world has gone quiet. The lanes were straight and flat, cutting through open fields that rolled away into darkness on both sides. Corn stubble and low winter grass caught the moonlight in dull patches. The sky was clear, pale with stars, and the air felt cold even through the glass. I had been on the road for hours already, running on habit more than thought, watching the dashed lines slide under the headlights. There were no houses out there, no barns with lights on, no signs of life beyond the occasional reflective marker. The radio played low, something forgettable, mostly there to break the silence. My phone sat untouched in the cup holder. Signal came and went in that area, but I was not paying attention to it. I just wanted the miles to pass. That was when I noticed movement to my right. At first, it registered as nothing more than a darker shape sliding through the field. I glanced over without concern, assuming it was my eyes adjusting or shadows shifting with the uneven ground. Then I saw the outline of a truck. It sat in the field parallel to the road, a large pickup, dark in color, riding higher than the grass. There was no fence between us, just a shallow drainage ditch running alongside the asphalt. The truck was moving. It was keeping pace with me, tires rolling through the field without headlights on. I eased off the gas slightly, more curious than worried, wanting to see what it would do. The truck slowed too, maintaining the same distance from my passenger side window. I sped back up, my heart giving a small, sharp kick. The truck accelerated with me, staying even. I told myself there had to be a simple reason. A farmer moving equipment late. Someone checking irrigation or livestock. Still, the way it matched my speed felt deliberate. Most vehicles in a field would lag or surge. This one stayed locked to me, steady and precise. I slowed again. So did the truck. The realization settled in slowly, heavy and uncomfortable. Whoever was driving that truck was watching me. Not passing. Not falling back. Matching me. I checked my mirrors, then looked ahead. The road was empty in both directions. No headlights behind me. No oncoming traffic. The field stretched wide and open, offering no cover, no structures. Nothing that explained why someone would be driving there at that hour unless they wanted to stay unseen from the road. I drove like that for several minutes, my eyes flicking between the lane ahead and the truck beside me. The moonlight was strong enough to show its shape clearly. A full-size pickup, older model, with a squared-off cab and a long bed. I could not see the driver. The windows reflected darkness. After 5 minutes that felt much longer, the truck's headlights turned off completely. The field went darker, but the truck did not vanish. The moonlight still outlined it, a moving shadow keeping perfect pace with me. That change flipped a switch inside me. Headlights off meant intent. It meant whoever was driving did not want to be seen by anyone else who might pass. Rare as that was. My mouth went dry. My shoulders tightened. I pressed the accelerator harder, pushing the speed past what felt comfortable for that road. The engine responded with a steady pull. The wind noise rose. The truck kept up. Its silhouette stayed level with my car, rolling smoothly through uneven ground that should have slowed it. I could see the ditch between us now, a narrow cut but deep enough to make crossing difficult at speed. The lack of a fence no longer felt like freedom. It felt like a boundary that could be crossed if the driver decided to. I slammed the accelerator down farther, the speed climbing fast. My headlights stretched farther down the road, the dashed lines blurring. I forced myself not to look right, focusing on the center of the lane, willing the miles to compress. I did not know what the driver wanted, but I knew I did not want to find out. Eventually, the truck began to fall back. Not abruptly, just enough that the front end slipped out of my peripheral vision. I kept accelerating until the road signs came too quickly to read comfortably. Only then did I risk a glance to the side. The field was empty. I did not slow down. I drove hard until my chest started to ache and my breathing felt shallow. When I finally eased off, my hands were stiff on the wheel. I kept checking the mirrors, expecting headlights to appear behind me or movement to my right again. Nothing did. 10 miles later, the highway approached a rural intersection. A single crossroad cutting through the fields, marked by a blinking yellow light suspended over the junction. As my headlights reached the intersection, I saw a truck parked off to the side. The same truck. It sat just beyond the stop sign, angled toward the highway, engine running. Its headlights were on now, beams spilling across the pavement. The shape was unmistakable. Same height, same body, same dark color. My stomach dropped. There was no way it could have passed me without me seeing it. No side roads, no hidden turnoffs. The fields offered no shortcuts that would put it ahead of me at that intersection. Yet there it was, waiting. I did not slow. I did not stop. I turned the wheel hard, tires squealing slightly as I took the crossroad without hesitation. The sudden turn threw my body sideways. Gravel rattled under the tires as I corrected and straightened out. I drove that secondary road fast, faster than I should have, every sense stretched tight. I watched for headlights behind me, scanning every intersection, every farm access road. None appeared. I stayed on that road until it ended, then took another and another, stringing together turns without thinking about where they led. I drove an extra hour out of my way, looping through towns I did not recognize, staying on lit streets whenever possible, avoiding open stretches even if it cost me time. By the time I finally reached familiar roads, the sky was beginning to lighten at the edges. My body felt hollow, drained by the sustained tension. When I parked, I sat in the car for several minutes, listening to the engine idle, grounding myself in the quiet safety of a place with houses and lights and people nearby. I told myself the truck had probably belonged to a farmer moving between properties. I told myself the matching speed was coincidence. I told myself the intersection sighting had to have been another similar vehicle. The explanations sounded thin even as I formed them, but they were enough to let me sleep. A week later, I saw the news. Someone had gone missing on that same stretch of farmland highway. Late at night, vehicle found abandoned on the shoulder. No signs of a crash, no clear direction of travel. The report mentioned tire tracks in a field nearby, running parallel to the road for some distance before disappearing. The details matched too closely to ignore. The understanding came slowly and stayed. Whoever had been in that truck had not been wandering. They had been practicing patience, matching speed, studying reactions, waiting for the right moment when the road was empty and the driver was alone. I replayed every second of that drive, every decision I made, speeding up when I did, turning when I did, not stopping at that intersection. Any one change could have put me in the wrong place at the wrong time. I still drive through rural areas at night when I have to, but I do it differently now. I watch the fields as closely as the road. I do not assume open land means safety, and when something keeps pace with me where it should not be able to, I do not wait to see what happens next. I was driving home from a friend's place just after midnight, the kind of hour where the roads feel borrowed and slightly unreal. The neighborhood streets near his house were quiet, parked cars lining both sides, porch lights mostly off. I felt fine when I left, alert enough, relaxed from the evening, thinking about nothing more serious than getting into bed. The route home was familiar. I had driven it hundreds of times. I still had the GPS running out of habit, the screen glowing softly on the dash. A few minutes in, the GPS rerouted. The map shifted, the line bending away from the usual path. I barely noticed at first. Sometimes it did that for traffic or road closures. I followed the new direction without thinking. Then it rerouted again. The screen flickered, recalculated, and told me to turn where I knew there was no road, just a fence and a drainage ditch. I ignored it and kept going straight. 10 seconds later, it repeated the instruction. Same calm tone, same wrong direction. Make a U-turn. The map zoomed in and out as if trying to convince itself. I felt a small pinch of irritation and reached to mute it, but my hand dropped back to the wheel. The streetlights had thinned out. I was moving into an older part of town where the blocks were longer and the houses sat farther back. Trees arched over the road, their branches cutting the light into uneven patches. The GPS rerouted again. Same instruction, same spot. It wanted me to turn around where there was nothing but darkness. I slowed slightly, scanning the road ahead. There were no cars behind me, no headlights coming the other way. The quiet pressed in, broken only by the low hum of my tires and the soft whir of the engine. That was when my headlights picked up orange ahead. A row of traffic cones stretched across the street, staggered but close enough to block a straight path through. They were clean and bright, reflective bands catching my lights hard. I braked and rolled to a stop a few car lengths back. There were no signs posted, no barricades, no work trucks parked nearby, no blinking hazard lights. Just the cones, sitting there in the middle of a residential street at midnight. I sat there for a moment trying to make sense of it. Road work crews sometimes left things behind, but this felt wrong. Too neat, too deliberate. I leaned forward, looking past the cones. The road continued straight, disappearing into shadow. No torn pavement, no equipment, no fresh markings. Nothing that explained why the street was blocked. The GPS rerouted again and told me to turn around. The instruction repeated, patient and insistent. I felt a tightness in my chest that I could not explain. Turning around would mean backing up the way I came, toward a stretch with no streetlights. Creeping forward meant crossing something that did not make sense but might be harmless. I chose forward. I eased the car ahead, tires rolling slow, heart picking up speed. I steered carefully between two cones where there was just enough space, telling myself someone probably forgot to collect them after a short job. As I cleared the last cone, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The cones stood unchanged, quiet and empty, like they had always been there. I made it maybe 30 seconds farther down the road. The sound came first, a sharp, ugly crack followed by a grinding vibration that ran through the frame. The steering wheel jerked in my hands. Then another crack, then another. The car lurched as if it had hit a series of low curbs in rapid succession. I instinctively hit the brakes, my pulse slamming into my throat. The car shuddered and sagged. The ride height dropped unevenly. I knew what had happened before my brain caught up fully. All 4 tires went at once. The sound was unmistakable, a tearing hiss mixed with the thud of rubber giving up. The car rolled a few more feet and came to a dead stop. The sudden silence afterward was crushing. I sat frozen, hands locked on the wheel, listening to the tick of cooling metal and my own breathing. My headlights cut a narrow tunnel down the empty street. I did not see the strip itself, but I could picture it clearly, low and hidden, designed to do exactly what it had done. I reached for the door lock and pressed it down, then checked it again to be sure. The GPS screen glowed uselessly, still showing the same wrong instruction. Before I could even think about my phone, headlights snapped on behind me. Bright, close, too close. A truck sat in the road, blocking the space between me and the cones. I had not heard it approach. No engine noise, no crunch of tires, just the sudden wash of white light filling my mirrors and bleeding into the car. The shape was tall, wide, lifted. The kind of truck that looked heavy enough to push my car out of the way if it wanted to. I did not get out. I did not open a window. I stayed exactly where I was and locked the doors again even though they were already locked. My hands shook as I brought my phone up. The screen lit my face, making me painfully aware of how visible I was from behind. I lowered it again, not wanting to draw attention, then brought it back up and held it low. The truck idled. I could feel it more than hear it. A low vibration carried through the air. The headlights stayed fixed on me, steady and deliberate. No one stepped out. No door opened. No horn sounded. The stillness felt intentional, like a test. Time stretched. My mind raced through useless options. I could not drive forward. The tires were ruined. I could not reverse. The truck blocked the way. Getting out would put me in the open, exposed in the glare of their lights. Staying inside felt like the only choice that did not end immediately badly. I focused on breathing. Slow in, slow out. I kept my eyes on the rearview mirror, watching for movement around the truck. Nothing changed. The street around us stayed empty, houses dark, windows blank. If anyone was watching, they were doing it without lights. After what felt like a long minute, the truck's headlights shut off. The darkness rushed back in, sudden and complete. For a split second, I could not see anything behind me at all. Then the truck's engine revved slightly, the shape shifted, and it turned around in the narrow street with careful precision. Its taillights glowed red as it drove away, disappearing back toward the cones and beyond them. I stayed still long after it was gone. My ears rang with the absence of sound. Eventually, I realized my hands hurt from gripping the wheel so hard. I fumbled for my phone again and checked the signal. It was weak but there. Enough. Help came later in the slow, procedural way it always does. The street looked normal in the harsh light that followed, almost harmless. The cones were gone. The spike strip was gone. The damage to my car told the story clearly enough. All 4 tires were destroyed cleanly, evenly, exactly as designed. I learned afterward that the cones and the strip had been placed that night. Not earlier. Not as part of any scheduled work. They had been set up and removed with purpose. There were no cameras in that stretch. No witnesses. No suspects identified. The explanation stopped there, neat and unsatisfying. The GPS issue was written off as a glitch, bad data, poor signal. Maybe it was. Maybe it had nothing to do with what happened. Or maybe it was part of the reason I ended up on that street at that exact moment, slow and alone and paying attention to the wrong thing. I drove that car again after it was repaired, but it never felt the same. Every vibration felt louder. Every reroute felt suspicious. Every cone on the road made my pulse jump. A month later, I sold it. Not because it was unsafe, but because it held the memory too well. I still drive at night. I still use GPS. But when something feels wrong now, when the road does not make sense, I trust that feeling. I do not push through it. I turn around early while I still can. I took the mountain road late at night to avoid traffic, the kind of decision that feels smart only because you are tired and want the drive to end. The main highway had been slow earlier, clogged with trucks and late commuters, and the navigation app suggested the cutoff as a faster route. I had driven it once during the day years before. At night, it felt like a different place. The climb started gentle, then tightened into a series of narrow bends that followed the shape of the slope. Snow was coming down lightly, not enough to stick yet, just enough to soften the edges of everything in dull sound. The trees stood close to the road, tall and dark, their branches catching the flakes and holding them. I slowed early, easing the car into second gear and letting it pull me upward without strain. The headlights cut a narrow tunnel through the dark, reflecting off the falling snow in a way that made distance hard to judge. The road had no shoulder in most places, just a sharp drop on one side and a wall of trees on the other. There were no houses, no lights, no signs beyond the occasional reflective marker nailed to a post. My phone had signal, but I was not using it. The radio played low, some late-night talk I was not listening to. I was focused on keeping the tires steady on the cold pavement. About halfway up, the snow thickened slightly. It still did not stick, but the road surface darkened and felt slick under the tires. I adjusted my speed again, slower now, patient. That was when my headlights picked up a shape ahead that did not belong to the road. At first it looked like a shadow standing wrong, taller than the roadside posts, centered in the lane. My brain tried to make sense of it as I closed the distance. A sign knocked down, fallen branch, an animal frozen by the lights. Then it resolved into a man standing in the middle of the lane. I slammed the brakes without thinking. The tires chirped and slid for a split second before grabbing. The car stopped hard, the hood dipping, my seatbelt tightening across my chest. I ended up about 10 feet from him, close enough to see details I did not want to see. He stood upright, feet planted, arms at his sides. He wore dark clothes that blended into the night, a jacket too thin for the weather, jeans damp at the cuffs. His face was turned toward me, eyes fixed on the windshield. He did not raise his hands. He did not step back. He did not flinch at the sudden stop or the engine noise. He just stood there, watching. The silence after the car stopped felt heavy. The radio murmured, then I turned it off without looking. The snow whispered against the windshield. My breath sounded loud in my ears. I waited for him to move, to wave, to show any sign that this was a mistake or a plea for help. Nothing changed. He stayed exactly where he was, his posture relaxed in a way that felt wrong for someone standing in the middle of a mountain road at night. A cold realization settled in. If I got out, if I rolled the window down, if I hesitated too long, I would be vulnerable. The road behind me was empty. The curve ahead hid everything beyond him. I put the car in reverse, my hand shaking enough that I had to steady it, and eased my foot off the brake. The car began to roll back slowly, tires crunching softly over the light snow. My eyes stayed on him the entire time. He did not step forward. He did not step back. He turned his head slightly, tracking me as I moved, but his feet stayed planted. As I backed up, the curve behind me came into view, the headlights sweeping across the trees and the road edge. My pulse hammered in my neck. I kept the speed slow, careful not to jerk the wheel. I did not want to lose traction. When the curve straightened enough for the lights to reach farther, another shape appeared in the beam. Then another. They stood spaced out along the road, each one just far enough apart to fill the lane ahead of me as I reversed. 3 shapes, maybe 4, hard to count in the shifting light, all standing still, all facing toward me. None of them moved or reacted to the car. They did not wave or shout. They did not rush. They simply existed there, blocking the road in a way that felt planned. My fear sharpened into something clear and cold. This was not an accident. This was not someone in trouble. This was a trap. I imagined what would happen if I had come around the bend faster, if I had not been able to stop in time. I imagined hitting the first man and being forced to stop, doors opening in the dark, hands grabbing at me. The thought made my stomach twist. I kept reversing, inch by inch, my eyes flicking between the shapes ahead and the edge of the road behind me. The snow had begun to stick now, a thin layer forming on the pavement, reflecting the headlights. My tires slipped once, just a little, and my heart jumped. I corrected gently and kept going. The men ahead stayed where they were, letting me retreat, not chasing, not closing the distance. That restraint scared me more than movement would have. After what felt like a long time, the road widened slightly into a turnout used by maintenance crews. I recognized it at the last second, a patch of gravel and packed dirt cut into the slope. I steered into it, straightened the car, and shifted into drive in one smooth motion. I turned the wheel hard and accelerated, the engine straining as the tires fought for grip. The car swung around, pointing downhill. I did not look back. I did not slow. I drove down the mountain faster than was safe, but controlled enough not to lose it on the curves. The descent blurred into a series of tight turns and flashing reflectors. My hands ached from gripping the wheel. My shoulders stayed tight, ready for something to appear in front of me again. Nothing did. The road stayed empty. The snow eased as I lost elevation, turning back into wet flakes that melted on contact. When the trees thinned and the road straightened near the bottom, I felt a wave of relief so strong it made me lightheaded. I slowed and pulled into a wide gravel area near a trailhead sign, needing a moment to breathe. The headlights washed over the ground, and that was when I saw the footprints. Fresh tracks pressed into the thin snow on both sides of the road, leading away from the pavement and into the woods. Several sets, all heading off at angles that suggested people had been waiting there. The prints were sharp-edged, recent. Some led from the trees toward the road. Others went back the way they came. None of them looked hurried. They looked deliberate. I sat there with the engine running, staring at those marks until the reality settled in. The men on the road had not come out of nowhere. They had stepped into place when they heard or saw me coming. They had chosen that spot because there was nowhere to go but back or forward through them. The turnout I used had probably been their mistake, something they had not accounted for or had not reached yet. I drove the rest of the way down without stopping, straight to the main road and then home. I did not sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the first man standing there, calm and unmoving, as if he had all the time in the world. In the days that followed, the story surfaced in the local news. A group had been arrested for staging fake breakdowns and roadblocks on isolated mountain roads, targeting lone drivers late at night. They used people standing in the road to force stops, then others hidden nearby to rush in. One driver had not made it out. The details matched what I had seen: the timing, the location, the method. The report explained how they chose nights with light snow or fog to reduce visibility and slow reactions. Reading that explanation closed the loop in a way that left no room for mystery. What I had faced was organized, planned, and human. There had been no hesitation in those men because they believed the road belonged to them at that hour. I had been almost next, another name in a short article, another warning to be careful on back roads at night. I no longer take that mountain road. When traffic is heavy, I wait it out. When weather turns, I stay put. The extra time never feels like a burden now. I learned how thin the line is between a quiet drive and something that cannot be undone, and how quickly a familiar road can turn into a place where you are not meant to stop. I was driving home from a second shift job just after 1 in the morning, the kind of shift that leaves your body tired but your mind wired. The factory lights were still burned into my eyes when I turned off the main road and onto the rural two-lane I used to save time. It cut through fields and low woods, no houses, no streetlights, just reflectors and faded lines. I had driven it plenty of times during the day. At night, it always felt longer. The highway was empty in a way that made the darkness feel heavy, like the road was swallowing the edges of my headlights. My radio was off. I wanted to stay alert. About 20 minutes in, I noticed a pair of headlights behind me. They were distant, far enough back that I could not tell what kind of car it was. That alone was not strange. Late shifts ended at different times, and plenty of people used that road to avoid the toll. What stood out was how steady they were. They did not gain on me. They did not fall back. They stayed right where they were, like they were locked to my speed. The road dipped and curved through shallow hills. My headlights swept across tree trunks and tall grass. Every now and then a deer sign flashed past. I slowed a little for a sharp bend where the pavement dropped off into a ditch. The headlights behind me slowed the exact same amount. The distance stayed the same. I felt a small knot form in my stomach, the kind that tells you something is off but you do not want to admit it yet. I sped up once the road straightened. Not much, just 5 miles over what I had been doing. The headlights behind me matched it. The space between us did not change. I told myself they were just a cautious driver doing the same thing I was doing, reacting to the road. Still, I watched them in my mirror more than I watched what was ahead of me. A few minutes later, I tapped my brakes once. Not hard enough to slow much, just enough to check. The red glow reflected off the pavement. In the mirror, nothing changed. No brake lights came on behind me. The headlights stayed steady, floating in the dark. That was when I noticed something else that made my mouth go dry. Their lights were wrong. They were not fully on. They were off most of the time, except for a weak low beam that appeared only when they crested a hill or hit a bump. On flat ground, they vanished completely, leaving only a dark shape that my eyes could barely pick up against the night. I told myself maybe it was a wiring issue or daytime running lights acting strange. That explanation felt thin. Driving without lights on a road like that was dangerous. Doing it on purpose felt worse. I checked my phone on the seat next to me. No service as expected. I considered turning around, but the thought of passing that car on a narrow road made my hands tighten on the wheel. I thought about calling someone anyway, just to feel less alone, but there was no point. The road sign for a side turn came up on my right, half hidden by weeds. It was a gravel road I barely remembered, one of those unmarked forestry access roads that led into state land. It was not on my map app. I had used it once years ago during the day to avoid a closed bridge, and I remembered it being rough but passable. I made a sudden decision and turned onto it without signaling. The gravel popped loud under my tires. Dust kicked up behind me. For a split second the road was empty in my mirror, and relief washed through me. Then the headlights appeared again, swinging onto the gravel road right behind me without hesitation. No pause, no misturn, the same distance as before. My heart started to pound hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. The road narrowed, trees pressing close on both sides. Branches brushed the edge of my headlights. The gravel was loose and uneven, with shallow ruts from logging trucks. I drove faster than I should have, knowing it was risky but feeling trapped. Rocks pinged off the underside of my car and against the doors. The other car followed at the same speed, never closing the gap, never falling back. The road climbed and dipped, twisting through the trees. There were no reflectors here, no signs, just darkness and dust. I focused on keeping my tires out of the deepest ruts. Every time I glanced at the mirror, the headlights were there, faint and wrong, like they did not belong to a real car. I tried slowing again. They slowed with me. I tried accelerating hard. They matched it. My hands were slick with sweat. I kept thinking about how far this road went, whether it looped back out or dead-ended. I could not remember. After what felt like too long, my headlights caught the dull shine of a metal gate ahead. A forestry gate, locked and chained, blocking the road completely. Beyond it was more darkness and the suggestion of deeper woods. There was no room to turn around easily. The road widened just enough for one vehicle at the gate, with trees tight on both sides. I rolled to a stop 10 feet from the gate. The engine idled loud in the quiet. Gravel crunched behind me as the other car slowed and stopped about 20 feet back. Their engine stayed running. Their lights stayed off. I sat there, frozen, staring at the gate like it might open on its own. The seconds stretched. My breath came fast and shallow. I thought about getting out of the car, about running, about calling the police even without service just to try. Every option felt wrong. The night pressed in around me, the trees blocking out the sky. Nothing happened. No doors opened. No movement came from the other car. It just sat there, idling, a dark shape with no visible driver. I do not know how long I stayed like that. Could have been 30 seconds. Could have been a minute. Time felt warped. Then, slowly, the other car began to move backward. Its tires crunched softly on the gravel. It backed up far enough to turn around in a wider spot in the road, careful and controlled, like the driver knew exactly where they were going. For a brief moment, the low beam flickered on as the front of the car angled toward me, and I caught a glimpse of a plain sedan, dark-colored, with no visible plates on the front. Then it completed the turn, drove back the way it came, and disappeared into the dark. The lights went out completely once it crested the first rise. I stayed where I was, staring down the empty road, waiting for the sound of the engine to come back. It did not. The woods were silent except for my own car and the ticking of cooling metal. My hands shook on the wheel. I did not trust myself to drive. I stayed there until the sky began to lighten between the trees. The air grew colder just before dawn. Birds started up in the brush, tentative at first, then louder. When the sun finally edged over the horizon and touched the tops of the trees, the road looked ordinary again. Just gravel, ruts, a locked gate, nothing else. I turned my car off and sat in the quiet for a while longer, letting my breathing slow. When I finally drove back out, I took it slow, checking the mirror every few seconds. The gravel road was empty. When I reached the paved two-lane, it was empty too. I drove straight to a spot with service and called for a tow, telling them my car had been acting up and I did not feel safe driving. That was only partly true. My car was fine. My nerves were not. Later that day, after some sleep, I looked up the forestry road. It did not connect to anything useful. It dead-ended at that gate and led into miles of protected land. There was no reason for anyone to be on it at that hour unless they were already there or following someone who was. I reported what happened, gave the time and location, described the car as best I could. Nothing came of it. No reports matched. No explanation was offered. I never took that rural road again. I added the extra time to my drive without thinking about it. Even now, years later, when I see headlights sitting too steady in my mirror late at night, I feel that same tightness in my chest. Some nights I still think about that car, idling in the dark, turning away only when it had me trapped, and I know that whatever its reason was, it had nothing to do with getting home faster. I was driving home from a construction site just after 2 in the morning. The highway stretched for miles in front of me, a long ribbon of asphalt bordered by fields that faded into darkness. My truck was old but reliable. A heavy-duty Ford the First had picked up secondhand, and the cab smelled faintly of oil and the lingering cigarette smoke I had let myself inhale during the day. The headlights carved paths through the black, illuminating occasional road signs and the occasional abandoned farmhouse, their windows like black mirrors in the night. I kept the radio on low, a station that mostly played static and the occasional talk show, but even that began to fade as I drove further from the city. My phone, sitting on the dash for GPS, lost signal somewhere outside the last cluster of houses, leaving me relying entirely on memory and the dim glow of the dashboard. I had been driving for hours, fatigue creeping into my shoulders and eyelids. The monotony of the road was hypnotic, a constant hum of tires on pavement and the occasional rush of wind from passing trucks. Somewhere in the middle of the stretch, I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. A car had pulled onto the shoulder ahead, hazard lights blinking. As I slowed, the shape became clearer. A dark sedan with the hood propped open, no one inside or around it. I scanned the shoulder, expecting maybe someone crouched over the engine, but the car sat empty. My pulse picked up slightly, but I dismissed it as exhaustion messing with my perception. I eased past it slowly, eyes flicking to the empty interior through the windshield. There was no sign of life, no shadows, no footsteps in the dust. I passed, heart thumping, and forced myself to refocus on the road. The road narrowed after that, curving through a stretch of low hills. The lines on the pavement reflected off the headlights in brief flashes, and I realized how isolated I was. No houses, no streetlights, no other cars. The desert stretched on either side, black shapes of scrub and rock indistinct in the low beams. I checked my mirrors obsessively, half expecting to see the sedan creeping along behind me. Nothing, just empty road. My hands gripped the wheel a little tighter. I kept telling myself that it was all in my head, that long hours and lack of sleep made shadows and shapes move where there was nothing. But the feeling of being watched settled in my chest, a quiet pressure that refused to leave. About 30 minutes later, I saw another vehicle on the shoulder. This one was different. A white van, its side door slightly ajar, rolling just enough to catch the wind. At first, I thought someone might be inside, trying to sleep or fix a mechanical issue. But there was nothing, no figure, no movement, just the slight rocking in the still night. My heart started beating faster. I passed it slowly, scanning the windows, seeing only the dark interior. The headlights caught a reflection off something metallic inside, maybe a tool or a piece of equipment. I forced myself to keep going, muttering that there were explanations. Cars break down, people leave vans unlocked. Nothing supernatural, nothing threatening. But I kept glancing in my mirrors, half expecting it to start moving, to follow me, and the thought made my stomach twist. By this point, exhaustion was making my thoughts jagged. My eyes burned, my shoulders ached, and the quiet hum of the engine felt too loud in my own head. I forced myself to focus on small, deliberate tasks. Check the speedometer, keep a steady lane, watch for signs of deer or stray animals. Then I noticed something strange up ahead. A set of headlights, bright and sudden, seemed to hover at the crest of a hill, as though suspended for a moment in the night. I slowed instinctively. The lights didn't shift, didn't dim, just hung there. As I approached, I realized there was no road junction, no turnoff, just the hill and the empty stretch ahead. The lights blinked once and then were gone, leaving only the darkness. I gripped the wheel, breathing harder. My rational mind told me it was an oncoming truck that had veered off, or some reflection on the pavement. But every part of me recognized the absolute wrongness of it, the subtle impossibility. I forced myself to keep going. Sleep was pressing down now like a weight in my skull, eyes fluttering despite my effort. Somewhere, a coyote howled, the sound drifting over the pavement, raw and sudden, reminding me how alone I was. My fuel gauge ticked toward empty, and I realized I had no way to call for help. No signal, no nearby towns, nothing but the endless stretch of asphalt. I scanned for any sign of a gas station, anything open. Hours of driving had left me with no landmarks, just the monotony of hills and scrub. The landscape seemed to shift, or maybe my mind did. Small hills becoming larger, shadows deeper, stretches of pavement stretching endlessly. I pressed harder on the gas, willing the next mile to bring something, anything human. Finally, a dim glow appeared in the distance. A small cluster of lights, yellowed and uneven. Relief surged through me as I realized it was a gas station. I turned off the highway, tires crunching gravel, headlights illuminating the pumps, and a single, small building. I parked, letting the engine idle while I stepped out and stretched, the cold night air cutting through the sweat and tension. The place smelled of gasoline and old coffee, the fluorescent lights flickering weakly. There was a clerk behind the counter, a man hunched over a newspaper, eyes barely lifting as I paid for fuel. I filled my tank, feeling the weight of every mile of that night pressing down. I stayed inside the station a while, sipping lukewarm coffee, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the soft clatter of cans in the background, letting my heart rate slow. When I finally returned to the road, the highway seemed almost friendly in comparison. My eyes were sharper, the tension in my chest easing, and the familiar rhythm of tires on asphalt replaced the uneasy tightness of the night. I reached the outskirts of the city as dawn crept over the horizon, light spreading slowly across buildings and streets. The night no longer held its weight, the shadows dissolving in the pale gold. By the time I reached my apartment, sun fully risen, I felt normal again, though the memory of those empty vehicles and impossible lights stayed with me. A reminder of how fragile the sense of security is when the world is dark and empty. I parked, shut off the truck, and for the first time in hours, exhaled fully, the the silence of the morning finally comforting rather than threatening.